Boldwood presents The Stranger at No.6, written by Gemma and read by Imogen Church. Phrogging. Phrogging is the act of secretly living in another person's home without their knowledge or permission. A person who engages in phrogging is sometimes called a frog, or less commonly, a frogger. The verb form frog is sometimes used. Phrogging is similar to squatting, except that phrogging involves living in an occupied property. Prologue. If I could go back, I wouldn't have stepped a foot inside the house. Just remember that whenever you next cross a threshold. You don't know what could be waiting for you. What you see on the outside, the beautiful structure and the picturesque setting, can appear like a dream, but it doesn't always represent what's inside. The house contained secrets, ones it took me too long to discover. By the time I did, I was too caught up in it to leave. People got hurt. Someone died, and lives were changed forever, mine included. Blog post number 1, www.phrogging.com. After 2 successful phrogging experiences so far, I wanted to share my tips and tricks with you and record my 3rd attempt from start to finish. I'll be posting daily so you can follow my journey, but before we begin, below are the rules I live by. Property must be watched for 2 weeks minimum before attempting access. No home workers or those on night shifts in residence. They must have regular, contractual office hours. Travelling on business is permitted. Large house, enough space to cohabit without owners suspecting. No internal or external cameras covering rear of property or point of access. No pets, no children under 5. 3 months maximum before moving on. Use only enough food/toiletries/supplies from owners to remain unnoticed. If caught, run. The rules are to keep me safe. The main purpose of phrogging is to cohabit peacefully without being detected. Free room and board with minimal interference with homeowners' lives. Chapter 1. The house was huge, undergoing a renovation despite it only being 13 years old. Modern in design, but still managing to keep a certain Sussex charm. The first floor was russet brick, the lower rendered and painted an elegant cream. As you faced the picturesque building, the welcoming covered entrance was in the centre. Maintaining the country style, a large panelled oak front door with an adjacent patterned glass insert matched the double garage. A sweeping resin driveway led to waist-height sage wooden entry gates. The only stain on the canvas was a giant yellow skip filled with the remnants of kitchen cabinets and a bathroom suite. My initial thoughts were that, although it was a great size, it would likely be chaotic inside with workmen coming and going. But during the course of the 2-week reconnaissance, they had almost finished. The owners were new, having only lived there for about a month, which meant plenty of hiding spots may lay undiscovered. Noises which could be deemed just the house, and, best of all, no cameras at the rear. From what I could gather, they had a camera doorbell, like most properties now, but that was it. The burglar alarm was old and rusted, with no flashing light to indicate it was working, and I guessed the buyers thought it was pretty secure, as adjacent to the house was a disused railway line with a steep embankment. At the rear, although overgrown and thorny, it was relatively easy to climb through the jungle and over the fence into their landscaped back garden, which wasn't overlooked by the neighbouring house. I'd made a couple of visits, which meant walking almost around the block to get to the woodland, breaking off branches and clearing a path each time. I got as far as the garden, nestling beneath the overgrown shrubs to watch, more inconspicuous than doing it from the quiet road at the front. Dressed in black, armed with binoculars and my dad's old thermos filled with tea, I sat under the cover of dusk and watched the couple and their young son through the bifold doors of their open-plan kitchen/diner in the late February afternoon. On both occasions, the wife arrived halfway through her husband cooking dinner, sharply dressed in a fitted suit, lips slicked in pillar-box red, and wearing patent-heeled boots. Her son rushed across the parquet floor into her arms the moment she entered the room. For all intents and purposes, it looked like a happy home, and one which would be perfect for phrogging. I'd seen no dogs being walked, no cats, no cameras or alarms, and from what I could tell by the lights glowing through the windows when it got dark, all of them slept on the first floor, leaving the loft conversion empty. Spotting the house had come at the right time. I needed to move on from my best friend Megan's sofa, picking up the vibes from her flatmates that I was slowly outstaying my welcome. To be fair, it was cramped. Megan lived in a flat above a betting shop in Crawley High Street, and there were already 3 of them sharing before I'd turned up a few weeks ago. I'd lived at home until last winter, when my parents had decided they were selling up to move to Spain as retiring expats, and had secured a long-term visa that would be renewed if they decided to stay. Most of my things went into storage, and Megan kept some of my clothes for me, but I preferred to travel light anyway. I'd considered going with them, but my life was here, and so were my dreams and aspirations. Strangely, they didn't involve sandy beaches and weekend trips to Benidorm. I wanted to be on the editorial desk of a tabloid newspaper. For now, I'd have to take the snippets I was given at the Crawley News, a local rag where my job as junior reporter mainly involved reviewing the latest cinema releases and covering the odd school fair. I was Molly Hudson, the aspiring journalist, that being a misnomer, who didn't even have a proper desk. The one who was outsourced to do all the shit the others deemed not worthy, and it paid peanuts. Being the youngest at 22 and the least experienced, I understood. It would do for now, but I'd work my way up, and because it was all done remotely, I didn't have to put up with the 9-to-5 life. That's how the phrogging started. I could barely afford a bedsit. The money Mum wired occasionally didn't stretch far, and I was running out of friends with sofas. Fed up with working out of the local library every day using their free Wi-Fi, I had looked first at getting a live-in job, like a nanny, but my heart wasn't in it. I wanted to write, and even though I was at the bottom of the ladder, a change of career wasn't an option. I dreamt of owning my own camper van, being free to roam wherever I wanted, but I couldn't even afford a car. Things would change, they always did, and when someone at the Crawley News Christmas bash mentioned phrogging occurrences were steadily growing in the UK, I was intrigued and did my research. More common in the States than here, cohabiting secretly with an unwitting family fascinated and terrified me in equal measure. It was against the law as far as breaking and entering was concerned, perhaps even stealing, as you'd use their electric, water and internet during your short-term stay, but the main appeal was living for free. A journalist to my bones, was I even committed to my job if I was going to blog about doing it? Anonymously, of course, no YouTube videos or TikToks, but good old-fashioned articles people had to read. I'd phrogged twice so far since my parents left, in between sofa surfing at Megan's, using those as trial runs to build my confidence and learn how to live undetected. This time, I wanted to record the whole thing from day one, so I had to make sure I picked the right house and the right family to ensure I wasn't discovered. It had slipped my mind with the upcoming festivities until Megan and I had gone for a long walk on Christmas Day after stuffing ourselves at her parents' house. Our intention was to walk the length of the Worth Way, a 7-mile expedition which started in Three Bridges, Crawley, and ended in East Grinstead. We made it halfway before blisters from our inappropriate footwear crippled us and we hobbled back the way we came. It was along Church Road, before the small stone bridge over the disused railway line, we passed the beautiful house with its sold board outside, standing out amongst the glowing houses surrounding it because there were no twinkling Christmas lights to be seen. "They must be moving soon," Megan had said as we blew warm air into our frozen hands. They must be, not having any decorations up, unless they belong to a religion which doesn't celebrate Christmas, I'd pondered aloud. "I don't think so, Mom. My dad knows the owners. They're downsizing as their children are grown up. Wonder who the new occupants will be." Lucky, that's who they'll be. Lucky to live in such a gorgeous house. We had carried on limping in our Converse trainers, but the idea had blossomed again in my mind. I always overdid the research, but better safe than sorry. I knew the floor plans and had photos of the inside of the house, thanks to the particulars still being available on the internet when it was up for sale, for a whopping £875,000. I didn't know specifics of what the new couple did yet, but the wife left early and the husband took the son to school at 8 o'clock before heading off for his day, returning with him around 4. He wore a suit to work, although it was lived in. His appearance relaxed in contrast to her sharp yet glamorous attire. If I had to guess, I'd say she was the breadwinner. The couple looked to be in their mid to late 30s, and I estimated the son, a blonde boy with freckles, was around 6 or 7. It seemed a perfect fit. Now all I had to do was get in. I climbed over the fence, my large rucksack, which contained all my worldly possessions, snagging on a rusted nail that had come away from the post. It was a grey, miserable day, the sky full of drizzle, and through the bifold doors, No.6 Church Road looked gloomy and uninviting. I checked my watch. It was just after 2 o'clock, but I waited in the shrubs for a while to ensure the place was empty. When I eventually approached the house, I tried the door, knowing it would be locked, but worth a go. Moving down the side to the utility room window, I saw that too was closed and locked. Gaining entry was usually the most difficult part of phrogging. People were more security conscious these days and never left the house without making sure their property was secure. Perhaps it would be like the last house where I'd had to slip inside the garage as the owners were leaving, the door slowly lowering as they drove away. I shivered, partly from the memory, but also, despite the many layers I was wearing, the air temperature was only a few degrees above freezing. I didn't want to wait around outside for too long, but at the same time I had packed all my things and was reluctant to come back another day. As I was debating, a shadow passed by the window, and I ducked down beside the water butt, my heart jumping into my throat. No one was supposed to be home. Muffled voices carried from behind the double glazing, followed by the noise of the bifold door sliding open. I shrank back against the rendered wall, exposed. If they came down the side of the house, I'd have nowhere to hide. The side gate leading onto the driveway was locked, and my only option of escape would be to scale the 6-foot fence and tumble down the steep bank to the disused railway line. I tried to steady my increasing heart rate. "Calm down, Mole."
I wanted to show you this.
A man's gruff voice intertwined with the slap of heavy boots on the patio. I held my breath, praying I wasn't about to be caught trespassing by these strangers. A man, maybe two, who weren't the owners. Had they broken in? Were they here to burgle the property? Could I have stumbled across a crime being committed? And if so, what would they do when they discovered me hiding? Chapter 2. I was finally able to exhale when the sound of footsteps led away from the house and towards the end of the garden. If I'd still been tucked in the shrubbery, they would have seen me for sure. I stole a look over the water butt and watched the two men with their backs to me, pointing out various sections at the end of the garden. I had to act fast, and while I had the chance, I crept out from behind the water butt and towards the rear of the house, my eyes never leaving the men talking. In my haste, I kicked a trowel, the metal scraping the patio, jarring the stillness. My entire body froze. The sound seemed to ring in my ears, but neither of them turned around. They were too far away, the pair deep in conversation, discussing improvements to be made, new fence panels to be put in, potentially a rockery and vegetable patch. They weren't burglars, they were workmen. With my heart almost exploding out of my chest, I darted around the edge of the house and through the open bifold doors while they were distracted. The warmth from the central heating smacked me in the face as soon as I crossed the threshold, turning my cheeks pink. There was no time to appreciate how neat everything was as I struggled out of my muddy boots, not wanting to be seen by the men in the garden when they turned around. Keeping low, I carried them through the kitchen with its midnight blue cabinets and into the bright magnolia hallway, where a grand oak staircase awaited me. Taking the stairs two at a time, the heady mix of fabric softener and pine-scented toilet cleaner hit me as I climbed to the first floor. The carpet was seagrass and rough beneath my socks, flowing into each room off the landing, all of them painted the same magnolia. I stepped into the boys' room first, where the name Nathan was spelt out in large green wooden letters on the wall above a single bed. The duvet was a pattern of racing cars and tucked tightly beneath the mattress like my mum used to do to my bed when I was little. Through the window overlooking the back garden, the two men were finishing their cigarettes, and I struggled to tell the difference between the plumes of smoke and their hot breath wafting into the air around them. Now that I could take a better look at them, I recognised the shorter man as someone I'd seen at the property before, when I'd been staking the place out. He had to be managing the refurbishment and looked relatively smartly dressed in chinos and a shirt. The other one, tall and thin with close-cropped hair, was more dishevelled in grubby, faded combats and a sweatshirt. I guessed he was a landscape gardener. More people coming and going in Church Road could potentially be a problem for my stay. I'd thought the work on the house was finished. The kitchen downstairs and the bathroom across from Nathan's room were both brand new, but perhaps next on the list were plans to sculpt the garden. With my pulse slowly returning to its usual steady rate, I peeked into the other bedrooms, committing to memory where the squeaks in the floorboards were. I'd been right about the sleeping arrangements. The largest bedroom on this floor was clearly being used by the couple. Their bedside tables contained books, sleeping medication called Heminevrin that my mum used to take, a water bottle each, and framed photos. They had a small ensuite, which seemed to be Helena's domain when I looked inside, by all the bottles of body wash, scrub, and shampoo. Back in the bedroom, the smell of expensive perfume lingered in the air, and I picked up a book on what had to be the wife's side, a Lisa Jewell thriller she was halfway through. The king-size bed had been hastily made. A bright mustard rumpled duvet cover was the only pop of colour in what otherwise was a bland room. In the third bedroom, there was no bed, just a beige sofa and a desk beneath the window where a monitor and keyboard had been placed. The hard drive was stored underneath with box files stacked beside it. I spotted the Wi-Fi router and took a photo of the sticker on the back where the password was printed. It would come in handy later if they hadn't changed it. I guessed the room was going to be used as an office, although I'd not seen either of them work from home while I'd been watching the house. They usually came and went like clockwork. I climbed the second set of stairs to the master suite, nerves pulsing with adrenaline. It was all open plan. There was no door. The stairs entered straight into the bedroom. I presumed the couple's intention was to eventually move up to the loft conversion with another ensuite. It would make sense for them to be up here, but perhaps Nathan's parents didn't want to be a floor away from their young son. For all I knew, he could suffer from night terrors or separation anxiety. Either way, it worked out better for me, as that's where I'd planned to hide out. It might be tricky being in such close proximity, but if I was as quiet as a mouse, it could work. Knowing their schedules meant I'd be able to shower and get in and out as long as they weren't home, so it wouldn't impact on my job, not with my irregular hours. Using the toilet may be a different story, though. The loft conversion had a huge skylight which flooded the room with natural light, and I watched the grey clouds swirl ominously above. The space was being used for storage. Empty boxes and black bags were dumped in the middle of the carpet, but at least this one was plush beneath my sock feet. The only furniture was a dusky pink chaise longue positioned under the window, which looked out over the driveway below. I sat, hoping to calm my nerves, surprised by its plumpness, but I wasn't intending to sleep on it. I couldn't allow myself to be so exposed if anyone came up to this floor. What if I was out for the count, and the wife came up to rummage through one of the boxes? We'd both get the shock of our lives. My eyes fell on the wall to my left, which housed a row of white built-in wardrobes, perfectly fitted to slant down with the roof at the front of the house. I slowly drew one open, acutely aware of the slight squeak on the track. It was perfect. The wardrobe was empty. One side had space on the floor of around 5 feet that would suit me in my sleeping bag if I was able to make the floor softer, as long as I didn't bang my head on the rail above for hanging clothes. In the middle wardrobe was a built-in vanity table and mirror with a small stool pushed beneath, and the last one was smaller with some drawers taking up half the floor space and another rail for clothes above. Buoyed by my new digs, I moved on to the ensuite, where a small but perfectly adequate white suite was encased in cream floor-to-ceiling tiles. I had no idea what their plans were for the space or how long it would take them to fill it. But with phrogging, there were opportunities to listen. If I got wind they were planning to move upstairs or relocate some belongings, I could make sure I was gone. I was jolted from my thoughts by the slam of something outside, and I crept over to the window overlooking the drive to see the two men from the garden climb into a liveried van with J.E. Property Renovations on the side. The wooden gate swung open as if by magic when the van edged towards it. At waist height, I was sure they were electric, more for convenience than security. But unless you knew the code, you couldn't drive your vehicle onto the property. I watched until they chugged out of sight, my shoulders loosening as the sensation of an empty house consumed me. It was just before 3, which gave me approximately an hour to have a quick look around and get to know the owners before retiring for the evening. In preparation, I laid my sleeping bag and rucksack on the floor inside the wardrobe, leaving the door open wide enough for me to squeeze through. Now it was time to explore, scanning for clues about the family I was living with, because the more I knew, the easier it was to hide. It was amazing how much you could discover from letters left on the dining table, photos attached to pinboards. But unlike the last house I'd stayed in, there was barely anything on display. That one was permanently messy, and I couldn't do more than a week before I was back at Megan's. Perhaps these homeowners were neat freaks who didn't like anything cluttering up their space, or maybe they were still unpacking and making the house a home. There was a grey plaque above the door from the hallway into the kitchen/diner I hadn't noticed before. The Reilly family, in white carved-out letters with 3 names beneath: Jack, Helena, and Nathan. "Hello, Reilly family," I whispered, looking back to the front door where I found a shot of the 3 of them on a white console table beneath a large round mirror. The table had a dish for keys, a Jo Malone reed diffuser, and a vase of fake white roses. The photo in a silver frame was taken on a fairground ride, the family's eyes squinting because they were laughing so much. Helena was beautiful, a sharp brunette bob tucked behind delicate ears with a small nose and thin lips. She had high cheekbones and chocolate eyes that drew you in, lined with long, thick lashes. Jack was punching, for sure, although he did have a kind face. His hair was short, strawberry blonde, and slightly receding at the temples. But there was a depth to his eyes, which were almost a sea green in colour. Nathan, who sat between them, was grinning from ear to ear, missing one of his front teeth, his knuckles white on the bar of the carriage. It was a great shot. They looked so joyful and full of life. I felt a pang of guilt, intruding on their happy home. I continued my search, hoping to find something that would tell me a bit more about the Reilly family, where they worked, maybe, or a calendar or diary with information. But without rummaging through drawers, there was little on show. On the kitchen island, I found a pad with the beginnings of a shopping list on it in a neat cursive. Apple juice, butter, kitchen roll. But it wasn't the contents which caught my eye. It was the branding on the top. St. Wilfrid School was a local secondary school. In fact, the same one I'd left 6 years ago before going to college to study media. It seemed like yesterday I was roaming the corridors, dragging my feet to get to class. Nathan was too young to be a pupil there, so where had they got the pad from? Just as I was contemplating, An engine spluttered outside, sending my spine rigid. I strained to listen, vaguely making out the squeak of the gate closing. Dashing out of the kitchen and up the stairs, I heard voices out front, then the click of a key turning in a lock. Whoever it was, they were home early. Chapter 3.
Daddy, can I go on the iPad, please?
Nathan's chirpy voice coincided with the sound of keys clanking against the dish in the hallway. I'd made it to the second set of stairs up to the master suite, listening to the activity below, my heart still going 10 to the dozen. Why were they back so soon?
Sure, bud. Mummy will be home soon, though, so let's get out of your uniform, wash your hands, and I'll get you a snack, okay?
I like the school club snacks,
Nathan griped.
I know, but it's parents' evening, no after-school club today. When Mummy comes home, we'll be going back to school to see Mrs. Milton.
Their voices got quieter as they moved into the kitchen, and I slowly climbed up to the second floor. Thank God I hadn't left it any later to gain access to the house today, as I might have been caught red-handed. As much as you planned or knew someone's schedule, there were always little deviations or movements to a routine. That was life. The important thing was to have a plan. But I didn't, bar making a run for it if I was discovered. I needed some time alone in the house to find alternative hiding places, spaces where I could store my stuff in case I couldn't get back to the top floor. At least it was Tuesday, which gave me 3 more days where I'd have the place to myself, if only between the hours of 8 and 4. My stomach rumbled, reminding me I hadn't had any lunch, then clenched as footsteps thundered up the stairs, thankfully stopping on the first floor. It was Nathan, rushing to his room to get changed or grab his iPad. I lowered myself down onto the floor of the wardrobe, sliding the door almost fully closed, and dug around in my rucksack for some biscuits to curb the ache in my belly. I checked the Wi-Fi on my phone after ensuring it was set to silent. All devices had to be whilst phrogging, and tried to log in with the password on the back of the router. It worked straight away. I imagined it was a new broadband installation, as they'd recently moved in, and perhaps Jack hadn't changed the password yet, or maybe he wasn't intending to at all. Some people weren't overly conscious about online security or au fait with technology. If that was the case, it would make life easier for me. If you knew where to look, it would be easy to spot an unidentified login to your Wi-Fi. But I had the feeling Jack wasn't that clued up. I logged off anyway, just in case. Around 10 minutes later, I heard the front door again. This time, high heels clicked on the parquet floor which ran from the hallway into the kitchen.
Mummy!
Nathan trilled, followed by thundering footsteps down the stairs. I imagined him leaping into her arms and being scooped up into a hug, the same as I'd witnessed before. Voices were muffled, and I couldn't make out what was being said, but it was too soon to leave my safe space to eavesdrop. Eventually, I'd be able to move around a little once used to the noises, ensuring the impact I was having on the family was insignificant. I wasn't here to spook them, play tricks or be a voyeur. Phrogging was about cohabiting. I guess it was thrill-seeking, in a way. I couldn't deny it was exciting knowing you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be. But your life had to mould around theirs. I'd learned from my research and 2 previous phrogging experiences. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Thankfully, I was able to focus on settling in because I'd submitted my latest article by email to Des, the editor-in-chief of the Crawley News, earlier today in Starbucks, buying myself a chai latte and a pastry as a treat. He'd wanted a piece on the new layout of the roundabout in the centre of town, which had already caused multiple car accidents, and I was pleased I'd managed to get a quote out of the local councillor. That was the typical kind of dull news I was asked to cover, and why no one took me seriously as a journalist. I kept pitching new ideas to Des, relentless in my efforts to build my portfolio further than traffic violations. Most of the time, he humoured me. He was an all-right boss, and occasionally, if he was in an exceptional mood, he let me go off on one of my tangents with the understanding that there was no guarantee of my article being published. I considered myself lucky. The wage wasn't great, but I had no rigid hours, just assignments to complete. I knew I was a good writer, however, and should be working on bigger things. A local magazine had picked up 2 articles I'd submitted last month, but unfortunately they didn't pay well. I wouldn't be able to survive being freelance, not until I was established. For now, the Crawley News would have to do. My phone flashed, and I saw I had a message from Megan. "Where are you? I just got home and all your stuff is gone." "Phrogging," I hastily replied. Within seconds, 3 dots popped up on screen to indicate Megan was replying. "Again? Where? I wish you wouldn't. It's not safe. Be careful." Megan always went overboard on exclamation marks, but despite her looking out for me, I knew deep down she'd be relieved to not get it in the neck from her flatmates tonight. Unimpressed, there was a freeloader bedding down on the sofa for the 3rd week in a row. "Honestly, Jack, you need to have a word with Marcus. They trod mud in everywhere. It's the last thing I need when I've been at work all day. And you need to get that burglar alarm reconnected too, or at least make the light on it flash." Helena's plummy voice travelled from the floor below. She was somewhere upstairs.
"Okay, I will. Can we just get going, as it'll be a nightmare to park and Nathan's appointment is at 4:30.
Jack sighed audibly, sounding every bit the nagged husband. Yes, I'm just going to use the toilet and put a bit of lipstick on." She quickly dismissed him. I tried to visualise her strutting around her bedroom. She looked like the type of woman who might. High-powered job and a control freak at home, maybe, with Jack, the downtrodden husband who followed her around like a lost puppy. I shouldn't jump to conclusions. I knew nothing about them yet, but first impressions were everything. I listened to muffled movements below me, making sure I didn't move a muscle. The last thing I wanted was to shift my weight and creak the floorboards. "Ready," Helena called, padding down the stairs. Moments later, the front door shut, and I crept out to watch the Mercedes SUV leave through the window as the sun started its descent. Back downstairs, I made tea to fill my thermos, perusing their kitchen cupboards to see what they had. Thankfully, Helena had left the under-cabinet lights on. There wasn't much in the way of snacks, other than fruit strings and Fibre One bars in a clear box with Nathan's name on. No sugary cereals. Instead, there was homemade granola and sourdough bread. I rolled my eyes, continuing the search until I found a box of crackers shoved at the back of one cupboard that looked like they were from a Christmas hamper. Tucking them under my arm, I nosed around a bit more but found nothing out of the ordinary. The fridge was filled with salad and vegetables, beef mince and lamb chops, plus a few yoghurt pouches, all either brand names or from Waitrose. Perhaps they had a weekly delivery to stock up on fresh food. Helena, or maybe Jack, obviously liked their meals cooked from scratch, but I felt sorry for Nathan. There wasn't a chocolate bar or a packet of crisps to be seen. At least the fruit bowl was well stocked with bananas, pears, clementines, and apples, and I took the shiniest red one and added it to my haul. It was freeing, being out of the wardrobe and having so much space to move around in. The radiators rumbled to life at 4, and the house was already warming up. Off the kitchen was a utility room in the same midnight blue. It was spotless, with a Sheila maid fixed to the ceiling for drying clothes in the colder months, something I'd only seen on television. How the other half lived. Cabinets containing cleaning and laundry products were fitted either side of a butler sink, with a washing machine on the end. I took the opportunity to swipe a roll of toilet paper from one of them to use upstairs. In between the kitchen and the lounge was a small study with another desk and wall-to-wall shelves housing books and ornaments. This room looked more lived in. The desk with its iMac was messy compared to the one upstairs. Perhaps this was Helena's domain. Moving on to the lounge, the space was dominated by an enormous dark grey L-shaped sofa with patterned cushions and folded throws at either end. The solid wood coffee table had been perfectly positioned in front of the sofa on a cream rug. On it was a stack of arranged books, which looked more decorative than anything else. Titles such as Tom Ford, Made for Living, Eat, Drink, Nap, Plantopedia, their spines intact, without a crease in sight. I rolled my eyes again, moving on to sniff the candles which had never been lit. Everything looked like it was for show. And although from the outside, No.6 Church Road appeared to be a beautiful family home, it didn't seem much like that on the inside. Nathan had no toys lying around, and there was no hint of his presence downstairs except for the odd photo. I was miffed on his behalf. Was he chastised for being messy? The Reileys also had a log burner stove and a large flat-screen television mounted on the wall of the lounge. Orange curtains hung from the ceiling all the way to the floor by the window, which looked out to the front of the house, and a spiky retro light fitting hung centre stage in the middle. It was a nice room, more personality than upstairs, but everything was too perfect. My gaze drifted back to the coffee table, and I noticed a business card sticking out between the pages of Tom Ford's fashion book. Sliding it out, I saw it was Helena's. She was the marketing manager for Oxalis, with a London address and telephone number, although I had no idea what they did. I slipped it into the pocket of my jeans and continued looking around. Off the hallway on the left, as you came through the front door, was access to the garage, and further along a downstairs toilet with a shower, but there was nothing more to see down here. Juggling the crackers, apple, thermos, and roll of toilet paper, I climbed the stairs, when a loud knock at the door made me jump. Whipping my head around, the crackers slipped out of my hand and bounced to the bottom as I froze like a child playing grandmother's footsteps. The security light outside illuminated an animated figure looking through the frosted panes in the decorative side panel. "Open the door!" an angry female voice shouted as I stared wide-eyed through the glass. My insides squirmed as I watched the shadow peer in, hands cupped to the pane, disjointed because of the pattern. I can see you, she hollered, hammering again, and I slowly backed up the stairs until I was sure I was out of view. Terror swept through me. Who was she? Chapter 4. Helena, I need to talk to you. The blood drained from my face as I waited for her to leave. I'd been seen. The game was up, but she thought I was Helena. Leaving the crackers where they lay, I climbed to the top floor to look out of the window, wanting to watch her go. When the woman finally gave up and stalked back down the driveway, I saw she was blonde and wearing a green coat, but that was about it. I half expected her to turn around and glare back up at the house, surely knowing she was being watched, but she didn't. Instead, she turned right at the end of the driveway and disappeared out of sight over the bridge. How did she know the code to get in via the gates? I didn't think they opened without one. Going back downstairs to retrieve the crackers, I no longer felt comfortable and debated whether to pack my things and leave. Whoever she was angry and assumed I was Helena refusing to answer the door. Perhaps they were friends and had a falling out. Maybe she was an unsatisfied client of Oxalis. My main concern was whether I was going to be exposed by a stranger when the woman finally caught up with Helena. I chose to stay, knowing it might make life difficult for Megan if I turned up at hers again, and the mystery played on my mind while I munched through the box of crackers. Taking advantage of having the house to myself, I found a pillow and blanket stored in the spare room under the sofa and took those along with a towel from the back of the airing cupboard, an attempt to make the floor I would be sleeping on a little softer. At 5:30, the Reillys returned, and soon after the smell of spaghetti bolognese wafted up to my floor, making me salivate. I half expected another knock on the door for the angry woman to come back demanding to speak to Helena, but she didn't, and unless they looked at their app for the camera doorbell, I guessed she would be none the wiser. However, there was no robotic voice announcing her arrival, so I assumed it wasn't connected. I struggled to relax, which wasn't unusual. The first night phrogging at a new property always gave me the willies. It was the unexpected. I didn't know if Helena or Jack would get restless in the night, if they wandered the house, or if Nathan sleepwalked. For all I knew, they could be into devil worship, and this room was used to sacrifice virgins. That's why research was key. But the snippets of time spent watching the family only gave me a glimpse of what their life was like, and you never really knew what went on behind closed doors until you were trapped inside with them. The first time was terrifying, and I barely slept at all. I only managed a week in a 3-story townhouse, hiding out in the basement where I couldn't hear anything except for footfalls overhead. If my parents found out, they'd go mad. It was hardly safe and not at all ethical. I'd be horrified to find someone living in my home without my knowledge, but it wouldn't be for long, and I wasn't causing the homeowners any harm. It was more of a social experiment. But I doubted other froggers were as harmless as I was. I logged on to the Wi-Fi again and busied myself checking my email, enjoying the light. It was dark in the master suite, but I couldn't put a light on, working by the small torch I always carried with me in my backpack, along with plenty of batteries. I responded to Mum's weekly check-in, read on my ancient Kindle, and watched the moon rise in the sky through the window. When I needed to use the toilet, I crept to the ensuite as quietly as I could, aware they were all downstairs on the ground floor watching television and unlikely to hear me. Around 7 o'clock, I listened to Helena bring Nathan up for a bath and put him to bed after he read her a chapter of Captain Underpants. A short time later, I heard the distant pop of a wine cork from the kitchen and muffled laughter. When they came upstairs at around 10, I shut my ears to the soft groans of pleasure and creaks of the bed below. I drifted off at some point after midnight, satisfied the family were asleep and I wouldn't be disturbed. The house had grown cold, and I snuggled deep into the sleeping bag. The only light was what came through the windows and a small plug-in for Jack outside his bedroom. 6 hours later, I woke with a start to footsteps climbing the stairs. My stairs. Unable to breathe, I watched Jack come into the master suite through the tiny gap of the sliding door before disappearing into the ensuite. My stomach rolled, my entire body tensing. Did he come up here to relieve his bowels in the morning? Was this a regular thing? He was dressed in shorts and a t-shirt like he was going to the gym. I heard a clank of porcelain, my view blocked by the half-open door to the ensuite. Would he see my urine and paper in the bottom of the pan and know someone had been here? I'd only ever flushed the toilet if I knew the house was empty, never at night. I gritted my teeth as my calf cramped, wiggling my toes to get some blood flowing, but reluctant to move any more than that. Rustling came from the bathroom. Then Jack emerged, slipping something small and black into his sock before heading back downstairs, not even glancing my way. I let out a sigh and flexed my leg, pulling myself upright in the wardrobe and banging my head on the rail when I heard the front door close. Rushing to the window, I saw Jack make his way down the driveway, put in headphones, and start to jog when the gates swung open. I hobbled around the room, waiting for the cramp in my leg to pass, groggy at being pulled from sleep so abruptly. Well, that was new. Jack liked to run in the mornings, something I didn't foresee nor observe in my reconnaissance, although I was never here that early. But why the hell did he come up here? In the ensuite, a damp sandwich bag lay discarded in the sink, but otherwise nothing was different. He hadn't flushed the toilet, although I couldn't tell if he'd used it. Whatever he'd retrieved from the bathroom, I was well aware he'd likely be putting it back on his return, and I had to make sure I was out of sight. Downstairs, all remained quiet. But 15 minutes later, I heard a faint alarm and Helena got up. Glad I'd had a chance to stretch my legs, I crept back to the wardrobe and listened to the Reileys get ready for their day. Coffee was first on the menu, and the smell made me crave a cup. Soon after, Helena got Nathan up for school. Jack came back from his run and showered. Toast was burnt somewhere in the house, setting off the smoke alarm, and like a whirlwind, they rushed around until Helena left. A car waited, blocking the gates, to pick her up at 7:30, a woman waving from the driving seat. I guessed if Helena worked in London, then she got a lift to the train station every morning. She yelled a goodbye and a reminder for Jack not to forget Nathan's lunchbox, and off she went. 30 minutes later, Jack hurried Nathan out the door and into the Mercedes to take him to school. Finally, after what was a frantic morning, all was quiet again. Jack hadn't come back up to the top floor at all, so whatever he'd retrieved, he still had it on him. Could it be cigarettes? Was he a secret smoker, hiding his packets from Helena? I had no idea, but I was dying to find out. With the Reillys gone, the priority today was getting a key to the back door cut so I could come and go with ease. Also, I wanted to see if I could get onto their doorbell camera feed. If it was working, then usually there would be a tinkling or a voice signifying a person approaching the door. But I hadn't heard anything yesterday. Was it connected or broken? I had a quick shower in the ensuite, being sure to wipe it down after me, and flushed the toilet. I was glad to wash off the sweat after being sautéed in the sleeping bag. Once dressed in the same jeans but a new top, I ventured downstairs and made myself a slice of toast and peanut butter, washing my plate and knife and putting them back where I found them. Seeing the notepad again, with more items added to the shopping list, reminded me I hadn't checked the website for St Wilfrid's School. Googling on my phone, I looked at the list of teaching staff and found Jack halfway down the page, his green eyes jumping out at me immediately. He was Head of Pastoral Care. It had been a relatively new concept when I was there, the addition of pastoral staff employed to ensure the well-being of the students, someone you could go to if you were being bullied or had a problem at home. I admired the concept, and Jack, I suspected, with his friendly face, would be good in the role. While downstairs, I checked which key unlocked the bifold doors, removed it from the ring, and slipped it into my pocket. Back in the master suite, I cleaned my teeth, rolled up the sleeping bag, and hid it in one of the wardrobe drawers, making sure I'd left no trace behind. Taking my rucksack, I left via the bifold door. I always took my bag with me, in case there was a chance I wouldn't be able to get back in. While in the garden during daylight hours, this time I noticed the fence had come away from the post at the corner. One of the slats was loose, and with a bit of force I made enough of a gap for me to squeeze through. Much easier and cleaner than scaling the fence. The bus stop was empty, and I waited for the number 3 to take me into town, where I got the key cut and popped into the Crawley News office.
Hey, Molly, any traffic cones blocking the road today?
Piss off, Jeff, I sighed as he chuckled, ducking down behind his PC. I knew I was the office joke, but it only made me want to try harder, especially to prove myself to idiots like Jeff.
Now, Jeff, wind your neck in.
Des came out from his office.
I've got something juicy for you today, Moll.
My spirits lifted, and I followed him inside his office, turning to give Jeff the finger.
Ignore them. They're only jealous that you have the thirst for it. Theirs dried up a long time ago. I know Crawley isn't exactly the hive of news stories, but as I said,
Everyone's got to start somewhere, I interrupted. I know, Des. I dropped my rucksack and slumped into the seat in front of his desk.
St Wilfrid's School,
he said, and my ears pricked up.
They've got a big event planned for World Book Day on the 6th of March, and they've asked us to help promote.
I groaned audibly. I thought you said it was juicy.
It is, as far as word count goes. We'll be running a feature next week and one after the event. I've got you an appointment with the librarian and pastoral. They're organising it tomorrow at 11, OK?
I sat straighter in my chair.